Today, we're happy to welcome to the show not one, but two awesome guests. We have Dr. Bernie Holliday, the mental skills coach for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and not Dr. Dan Fisher, but he's great, the head women's coach at Pitt University. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome being here with you guys again.
So I believe the two of you have been working together for about 3-4 years. So thought it'd be fun to just hear how you guys first linked up.
Yeah, I'll take that because I think I should start out by saying thank you. And I first, heard from Bernie Holliday on your podcast, and just loved what he had to say and how he looked at the game. And I remember listening to it, thinking to myself, gosh, this guy's he works with the Pirates. Does he live in Pittsburgh? Could I beg him to just take pity on us and stop in a few times? And so yeah, you kind of linked us up, and it's been a great journey for me and for our team.
So the podcast is just changing lives. Glad to hear it. So how did this relationship start? How did it go just swimmingly from the beginning?
Well, yeah, I'd love to hear Bernie's side of it, but we had a few initial conversations about kind of what we expected out of it. And he was in town with the Pirates, and then stopped by our practice in preseason. If I recall correctly, had a bunch of individual meetings with the girls just to connect, and then comes in for his first practice, and it was the worst practice of my coaching career. I think, we had an ankle sprain, like a minor concussion, and then we had about halfway through a torn ACL, and this was 4 days into preseason, and we are, generally speaking, a pretty low injury team, and just everyone's faces, we had high expectations, and I'm looking at Bernie, and I don't know him very well, and we send the girls to get water, and I go, I probably should have addressed the elephant in the room, shouldn't I? And Bernie kind of looks at me as like, I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, I've never been in a gym that was quieter than that one at that moment. Everybody just went completely blank, and one of the assistant coaches walked up to me and goes, "Our season is in trouble right now." I just remember that attitude just kind of being contagious, and Fish did a great job of addressing the elephant in the room and getting us back on track. But it was a surprising first practice for sure.
Bernie, were you slowly backing out of the room? Like, all right, I think I'm done with my time here. I'm going to go back to the Pirates, professional baseball.
Yeah, one of our mantras is we do hard. So I leaned in.
That's awesome.
I'm just curious, when you said address the elephant in the room, like, what does that conversation sound like? How do you get the team back on track when they're such a fiasco?
Well, I think generally speaking, as a leader of a group, you try to be pretty emotionally stable, when there's big swings in energy, and you try to model, that you've got it together. Because I don't think it helps, certainly doesn't help an injured player if the coach is freaking out as well, and so I think I just brought the team in and said, hey, I'm feeling it too, just so you know. I mean, this is and I kind of just asked, hey, do we want to call it for today, or where are we at with this? Do we want to try to push through and get something out of this? And so I think that was essentially the advice that Bernie kind of gave to me, to just to say how I was feeling as a leader.
Yeah, Fish did a good job in that moment of being very authentically vulnerable, and I think it allowed the players then to kind of be vulnerable as well, and we could just honor the fact that this is a really hard place for us all to be, and then we decided to move forward with it. They decided to move forward with it.
What if you go the other way and you're just like, no, everything's fine, or ignore it and just kind of there's a lot to be said for optimism. Is there any downside to just kind of, just keep going?
Well, Bernie always talks about training to the truth, And I think, when things are minor, you can kind of diminish them, but I think my sense is there's certain times and, where just things are so big that they need to be thrown out there.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. Well, this is a great start. It'd be fun to get into what happens the next 3-4 years, because I know since that moment you guys have had a ton of success. I believe Elite Eight followed by 2 Final Four appearances, and it'll be fun to just learn how this relationship's developed, how you've incorporated them. But I'm curious, actually, if we go backwards one more step, before you brought Bernie on, Dan, what did you do to teach the mental game, and I guess then how has it changed since he's joined you?
Yeah, there were a couple years we did have we worked with someone that came in sporadically. It was always important to me. We have a book club that, we have the girls read mindset. We have, some basics, some foundational stuff we want them to do, and articles, and we did some guided meditation as a team, so it was there, but I think once we brought Bernie in, it did a couple things. One, we started doing a Zoom, one session, 30-minute session a week. So we became very just intentional about consistently training the mental game, not just, here and there. And then it also, I think, it gave us a common language, and it just gave kind of me someone that, at times he's a coach to me or a friend, or it gave me someone to kind of, I guess, solve problems with.
And then Bernie, I know you've worked with a bunch of different programs. What were some of the themes that you found hit home at Pitt?
Yeah, Billy, as you guys know, having coached and currently coaching, every year the team takes on sort of a different personality based on who comes in and who exits or departs the team. So, each team kind of has its own unique feel to it. And when I first came in with Fish and the crew there, we had a lot that were, I call them processors, like heavy processors and heavy feelers. They thought a lot and they felt a lot. So, much of our stuff early on was really focused on, understanding self-talk, managing thoughts, understanding emotions. I've shared with you guys before, one of the things that I think really resonated with that early group was the concept of having mental discipline and knowing when to think and when to be able to shut down the thinking and go into sort of instinctive athlete mode. We call it think box, play box. It's a concept I stole from Annika Sorenstam, where there's a time to think in that 15 seconds between points, but then there's a time where you need to be able to commit to something and go. And we talked a lot about think box, play box that first year or two. And I had a girl text me right after one of our sessions on Zoom. And she said, Bernie, I think in the think box, I think in the play box, I think all the time. How do I figure out how to do this? And, we actually talked about how do you drill the play box in practice? How do you get really good at play box in practice? So that was one of the things I think. The other piece was the emotion piece, which is helping the players realize that you don't have to change your emotions, but maybe there's value in changing your relationship with your emotions. So recognizing that, emotions are very natural, normal, and somewhat hard to control. And can we lean into them rather than be afraid of them? And I referred to it as sort of an and versus a but relationship with your emotions. And I'll give you a story that kind of highlights what that is. I've shared this with the girls. I shared this with our ball players in Pittsburgh. It's the Starbucks example where, let's say if you're 25 and you're single and you're in Starbucks and you look across the room and you see possibly, this physically attractive person who's got a great smile and seems to light up the room, and you're thinking, man, I'd really like to ask this person out. But what if I get rejected? And suddenly that fear of rejection takes over, and chances are you're not going to go across the room at all. And if you do, you're not going to be yourself if you do talk to this person, because you're going to be, kind of gripped with that fear of being rejected. But then shifting it to the and perspective is like flipping it 180 and saying, you know what, there's a person across the room that might reject me. And so what? I want to ask them out. And that's really the idea of kind of the willingness to lean into the emotion and then to make a choice based on your goals and what you want, not necessarily on the emotions and how you feel. So those were some of the early principles I think that we hit. As that team evolved and as things changed, with personnel, having new players come in, other players graduate, we started to land on this concept of ordinary versus extraordinary, and common versus uncommon. And that's something I think that Fish really grabbed a hold of, is how can we be uncommon in our thinking, because common thinking gets common results, and ordinary approaches get ordinary outcomes. So how can we be a little bit more extraordinary in how we pursue things? So we spent the year talking about, what does it mean to have uncommon goals? What does it mean to have an uncommon focus? What does it mean to have an uncommon attitude and having uncommon communication, both with yourself, self-talk, and with your teammates? And really trying to, if you think about that bell curve, 95% fall within those 2 standard deviations in the middle of the bell curve, and very ordinary perspectives and views of life. We want to be on that 2.5%, right on the tail of that curve. And how can we kind of put ourselves there and create a gym that has that kind of a perspective of being really extraordinary and uncommon in how we view volleyball and how we view ourselves. And I think, I guess probably the last thing that we've landed on more recently with this team, and after some of the success we've had and some of the goals and aspirations that we continue to have, is really exploring this relationship between standards and expectations. And as Fish and I talked about it, really prioritizing standards over expectations. There's the Michaela Schifrin's the probably best skier of all time, both on the men's and women's downhill side of the sport, best ever. And she's been asked, hey, when younger skiers come up and talk to you, what advice do you have for them? And she says, well, I tell them, my mantra when I had my best season ever was high standards, low expectations. And the idea that sometimes when we have expectations and they don't start to play out the way we expect, panic sets in, freak out sets in, you get tense, you get tight, and we don't play our best. So how can we kind of put the expectations aside and really commit to having the highest standards possible every single day? So I think those are probably some of the themes that have evolved over the years with Fish and I, and some of the things that really, I think, stuck out with the players.
And when you talk about extraordinary, what were some of the things you guys did that were uncommon, maybe, for other teams and programs?
Fish, do you want to start out on that?
Well, yeah, we do a lot of, Bernie will just bring us a lot of material about how the greats think, and what their self-talk is. And periodically, we'll just do exercises where we contrast and we say, hey, and we'll compare ourselves at this point, and we'll just put up a list of like the top 5 programs in the country or the top 10. And we'll say, hey, are we better teammates than Texas or Nebraska or Louisville, or do we love our coaches more? Do we care more about academics? Do we do more extra reps? Do we watch more video? Do we we go over all the categories we can think of, and we don't really know always the answer, but the exercise of, the girls always have an opinion, and and especially when you have a few transfers on your team, it's an opportunity for them to go, hey, we have some more work to do in this area, or we're way better than this team in this area. I know those girls, they talk crap on each other all the time. We don't do that. So it's I would say that's we do a lot of try to not just talk about extraordinary, but contrast with ordinary.
It feels like a lot of that, at least in my mind, and maybe that's me having more of a fixed mindset. It's like kids, they either have that drive and hunger, like you got to recruit it. I don't know. It feels like, is that something you can develop? What have you found? Is that something you look for when you're looking at transfers, looking, at high school recruits, or do you feel like you've been able to make some progress in elevating their standards?
In terms of just, are they like intrinsically motivated, or?
Yeah, I guess people are willing to practice on their own for an extra 30 minutes and watch film, more than.
I think it can be developed, and I think what people around you are doing influences you,
Right.
So I think, I've asked Bernie about this, I said, hey, do people ever really change, like, unless they hit rock bottom, unless they have like a lot of pain? And he said, typically not, unless they're between the ages of 16 and 25, because that is such a formative time that there still is a window, you know, to maybe create some habits. I mean, that's Bernie, you can probably jump in here.
Yeah, Bernie, if you could build off that, I'm curious, like what Dan said is, you know, I could see peer pressure being a big influence. Is it having stories, having role models? Like, what are the things that do inspire?
I think what we have trouble changing is personality. You know, a lot of times your personality is pretty trait-like, pretty innate, and it doesn't change a whole lot over time. But what we can change is perspective. And I think one of the roles that the coach gets to play, and one of the most powerful roles the coach gets to play, is to be a lens changer, to be able to change the lenses of players. Because, you know, our players come to us at 18, having some very interesting lenses that they look at life through. You know, whether it's the former coaches they've had, former players they've had, the family they grew up in, but they come in with all sorts of different lenses, and the coach gets to be that lens changer and provide more perspective, different ways to look at situations. And I think that's very, very changeable, very developable, is to be able to look at a situation, to look at a challenge with a new lens or with an additional lens, to be able to see something in a different way than you once looked at it before. And I think that's where Fish has been so good at challenging our players to not look at volleyball situations and life situations through normal lenses, but to kind of look at it through more of an elite lens, or more of a learner's lens, or more of a person who's able to be resilient. What does their lens look like? And that's something that I really value and appreciate about Fish and his staff, is they've been really good at being lens changers for the players when the players are going through hard times.
That's awesome. I'm curious, going to the standards over expectations, kind of hearing more about the specifics with that. I could see, again, maybe Dan, when you first came into Pitt, it's easy not to talk about expectations because there was nothing to really build off, right? And now it seems like if you're in your program, the expectation is we're going to win every match in the ACC. We're going to make the Final Four. And I don't know, I guess one way is like, oh, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about expectations. We don't address the elephant in the room, and, you know, and just deal with standards. But I don't know, I guess, how do you navigate that when those are there, and, you know, those uncontrollable things are hanging over your program?
The kind of mantra that, you know, we use as it gets, you know, as we were making our run is from Bernie, and it's, you know, we don't expect to win a championship. We don't expect to be in a Final Four, but we've put the work in, and we know we can. So we're operating just from a place of, yeah, like, I don't know if we will, but and that, I think that framing just makes it feel a little bit lighter. You know, you're going into a game, hey, I don't know that we're going to win, or that I'm going to get 15 kills, but I know I can. You know, I know, like, I have it, like, it's, so I think just that's kind of the framing we've been using, and I think it works for me, and I think it works for the girls too.
Makes sense. Bernie, what about, and maybe you covered them, just kind of topics that you found that hit home during different times of the year, the off season, preseason, versus, you know, when you're making that Final Four run, or the things you found that have been more effective, more impactful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that's really evolved, I think, for me, as I've had really cool opportunities with Fish and John, with you, and to explore how different themes or topics or skills fit at different times in a season and throughout the year. And I think if I were to borrow from some of the stuff I did with the Pirates, I kind of put them into two buckets. You know, there's sort of this developability bucket, like how do you develop yourself fully, grow, learn, become a better player. I call it the developability, you know, your ability to develop. And then the competability, you know, the ability to compete and to fight and to get through some really hard times during a match. And that's the other bucket, is this competability bucket. So normally it seems like in the off season, I focus a little bit more on the developability side of things, really highlighting and emphasizing what does it mean to have a growth mindset, exploring what growth mindset principles are, what growth mindset self-talk sounds like. I borrowed something from one of your mentors and friends, Tom Black, you know, where he talks about being in the gap. You know, being in the gap is sort of right above and right outside what you're capable of doing, where you're in this place of frustration because you can't quite do what you're being asked to do. And we really spend a lot of time trying to reframe, what does it mean to fail in practice? What does it mean to be challenged in practice? What are the values and benefits to being challenged and to being in that gap, and taking pride in being into the gap rather than being frustrated about it, and almost seeing frustration as a beneficial thing in the learning process. So a lot of the developability piece is kind of framing it that way. And then I think we use that time to really clarify some goals and clarify some values. What do you really want out of this upcoming season? What do you want about your skill development? And what are going to be the values that are going to ground you as you pursue those things? What are you going to stand for on the practice court as you pursue those goals? Because we're going to lean on those values and those goals in the fall during the competitive season a lot more when it hits the fan, because as Ken Revisit says, it's always going to hit the fan. We got to make sure that we've got our values clarified, that we know what we stand for, our non-negotiables, and then we've got to know what our goals are. So we're making decisions based on those, not on the moment-to-moment emotions that we're experiencing. So that's a lot of the stuff that we do, I think, in the off season, is the developability piece. And then as we get into August, get into training camp, and then get into the competitive season, we shift more to sort of the mental skills that are related to competability. How well can I compete? How can I compete to the best of my ability during adversity? And a lot of that's focused on, I call it trusting mindset. How can you trust yourself, and how can you trust your ability? And I think something that I borrowed from Ken Revisa, you and Billy both know Ken and have a chance to work with him and read his book. But Ken talks about having something to go to when it hits the fan, and having that reset and having those reset techniques, those reset buttons, and understanding what your yellow lights are when you start to get yourself into trouble, and having that reset to get back to green. So I think it's some of those skills that we really hit in season, is hunting the good stuff, being able to balance out, that negative bias that we all have, with being able to hunt the good stuff and take inventory of reasons that we have to trust ourselves, and kind of building that inventory over the course of the season. Why should I trust myself? Well, why do I have any business even believing in myself? And starting to build that inventory, build that list across the season. And then I think the third thing, which is you guys have really helped me explore, because I've been lucky enough to be with some really successful programs, is how do we approach postseason? Like what do we do mindset wise to get them ready for an NC2A run? Because that's a different feel. And Fish and I've had this argument, not an argument, but this discussion of, is it the big tournament? Is it the next tournament? Or is it just a different tournament? And how do we approach it as a different tournament, and not minimize it as, oh, it's just the next tournament, but also not blow it out of proportion as, oh my God, this is the big tournament. And I think those skills, you guys had Ashley Merriman on your podcast before, and she talks a lot about seeing things as challenges or threats. So we really built up the challenge piece in the postseason, getting players more of a challenge mindset rather than a threat mindset. I've used the metaphor of sort of being a hunter, with a hunter mode rather than feeling like you're being hunted, and in more of that prey mode. And we talk a lot about reframing nervousness as excitement, and this idea that pressure is a privilege and not something to be afraid of, and that's a cliche, but at the same time we really kind of break it down. What does it mean pressure is a privilege? And giving you an example of that, I remember my first time at the Final Four, and I step onto the court and the lights feel like they're 3 times as bright, and you could feel the floor vibrating with the noise in there. And I started to get sort of that nervous feeling in my hands. My hands started to sweat. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is kind of heavy. This is big. And right then I felt my phone in my pocket vibrate. And I looked at my watch, because my watch sends my text to my watch. And it said on there, hey, good luck in the Final Four. I'd give anything to be where you are right now. What a cool experience. And it was from one of my coaches, my fellow volleyball coaches. And I remember thinking right there, like, it reframed everything for me. We talk about the lens changing. That was one of those lens changing moments for me. Like, wow, this is a really cool moment to experience pressure, and not a lot of people get to do this. I should really lean into this to have some fun, because not a lot of people want to be where I am right now, experiencing the pressure that we're feeling right now. So we really did a lot on really getting challenge mindset focused, hunter focused, and leaning into the pressure and the excitement of the moment. So I guess as we went through sort of the off season into the season, and then kind of leading into postseason, that's been some of the themes and how they've evolved over the year.
Cool. It's a cool reminder about the pressure as a privilege. When you come into a program, you mentioned in the off season, like being clear on maybe team values. When you come into a program, how do you find those? Were these values that Pitt already had established and you kind of added some on, or what's that process like?
Fish, do you want to jump in on kind of where you guys are with your own values, and then I can kind of talk maybe about how we help the players then find some of their individual values within the larger team values.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly our program values, and I don't know how deep you want to go into those, but so I think there's that that they have to adopt if they want to we talk about, the only kind of diversity we don't want is diversity of values. If you don't want to work really hard and be a great teammate, this is going to be a tough place for you. And but everything else is, let's bring it on. And so I think we're pretty clear from the beginning about what I'm all about, what the program's all about. And then I think we do a lot of work, especially in the off season of, with Bernie about, hey, what are my competitive values, and what do I want? What do I feel like and look like when I'm playing my best? And so
And
there's a difference between the team values and personal values. Maybe that's where you're going, Bernie.
yeah, and you want them to complement one another. We don't want them to be sort of diverging values where what I want individually goes against the team, which is I think what Fish is talking about. And as long as they fall within the line of the team values, then we're good. And hopefully they complement the team values, which in most cases they do. But we spend a lot of time talking about aspirational values too, not necessarily things that guide me, but things that I want to guide me. Things that I want to grow into as values or a value system. So it's a messy process. It's not easy for an 18 to 23-year-old to come up with, life values that become a foundation for their decision making. It can get messy. It can be kind of cliche and surface level at first, but I think every year the players do it. They get a little bit deeper, a little bit more nuanced in what they believe and who they want to be. And by the time they get to their junior or senior year, they have a pretty good set of foundational values that make up how they operate and how they work day to day. And Fish has done a good job of that, each preseason helping players and in the off season giving players assignments on helping them get to know themselves better, learn about themselves more. And one of the questions that I'll often ask, which is kind of, it's not the funnest to think about, but I think it really kind of drives home what do you stand for is, in your business, you and Billy, what are you willing to get fired over? What's a value of yours that's so strong that if your boss said, hey, you can't do that anymore, you'd say, well, okay, you got to fire me then, because this is something I want to stand on and I'll live and die by this. I'm willing to die on the sword for this. So for the players, it's like, what are you willing, what are you going to stand for that you're willing to lose your spot for? Because you're going to do it your way because it's that strong, or you might lose your scholarship for it, because you're going to do it your way because you believe that strongly in it, that it needs to be done that way, that if the AD came in and said you can't do it that way anymore, you would hand in your scholarship and say, I'm done, because this is one of my values. And that gets them thinking about it a little bit different, but it's a messy, hard process, especially for the younger players to work through it. But I think it's extremely valuable.
I feel like I got to ask now, Dan, what are you willing to get fired over?
If I no longer had control over, like my roster, I think if I couldn't make a player go for a ball, defensive effort, go, hey, like, pretty please, will you, right? I think if there's, those jump in my mind of like, because really the only non-negotiable in my gym is defensive effort. And so, those are, but yeah, having some, control over like playing time and practice decisions and being able to still being able to train hard, with that those are things that jump out.
Yeah. As Bernie went through the themes.
What about you, John?
What about me? I agree with the effort one. I know, we've starting to live in a little bit more of a fragile culture, and I think it just could be easier and easier to tell coaches to play it safe and maybe to be soft with their players. And I know there's a balance with all that, but if I'm not able to challenge players, in a safe way, then I think I'm out. Yeah, I'd have to think. I have to think about it more. I mean, for me, being able to learn and explore and try new activities and practice, and being able to maybe do things outside the box, and just feeling like I can be free in the sorts of training methods we use. If I felt constricted there,
yeah,
I'd say see ya. But yeah, it's a good question to ponder.
Yeah.
I was curious, as you heard Bernie go through the themes in the season, off season. I'm picturing he's talking about, he's covered on the podcast, the white belt, some of the growth mindset stuff. And as you work your way to developing and into the postseason, what are the ones that kind of fire you up the most? Like you look forward to as you've gone through a couple cycles, or that you feel like hit home most with the team?
Well, I would, Bernie, it makes it sound like it's, and for him, maybe it is, it's like very like organized.
Like
His
linear?
mind-
Yeah.
To me, it's evolved a little bit more into, there's just a lot of times I call him up and I say, hey, here's where the team's at, here's where this player's at, here's the kind of things the group's struggling with. And so it's a lot of kind of like a lot of his messaging, I think, is very specific
Hmm.
to the moment.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes it's like, hey, we'll just talk about, the girls will bring up, hey, here's a couple areas we want to learn more about. We're struggling with, we're struggling with high expectations, or how to, like whatever it is. And so we'll just do a deeper dive into it. So I feel like, I appreciate how, thoughtful and adaptable Bernie is, with where the team's at.
Yeah.
But I think the one that we've, in the last year that fired me up the most is we have a bullseye. And I think he stole it from tennis or something, but it's the outside of the bullseye is help me out here, Bernie. We have tank, choke.
Yeah, it's TACC. So tank, anger, choke, and compete as sort of, or challenge, as you get from the outside to the inside of the bullseye.
And so we almost can define any behavior within the bullseye, and we'll talk through like practice drills, and we'll say we're doing an exchange drill where we gotta get 20 in a row, but the ball keeps dropping at 5, and you can see their shoulders are hunched forward, and they're quitting. And then say that like the next phase is they're struggling through it, and but they're staying in the fight, but they're almost getting it. You can see they're pissed off. And then the other phase would be like they gotta get 20 in a row. They keep getting to 19, and their hand starts shaking, and then they just gaff it right at 19, and that's the choke. And what I've learned from Bernie is, and what we frame for our players is, well, that's actually not, because before I worked with Bernie, and I think a lot of players think that choking is the biggest thing to fear. And really, we're like, no, you're right there. You got to 19. You can learn how to handle that moment. You can learn how to operate under that pressure. Mm-hmm. Whereas what we don't want is the quitting, right? That's the, just the, hey, we're not going to get it. We have 7 minutes to get this drill done, and there's 30 seconds left, and I'm looking at the, just mailing it in. And so we've had a lot of fun with just defining, like whether like drills or even just behaviors, like, hey, where are you on the bullseye? Are you in the zone? Are you tanking? Are you quitting? Are you pissed off? Are you, like, so we talk a lot about that bullseye and sat or mat. It's one of we've had a lot of fun with it.
It's great to have those images and analogies. And there's something you had said at the beginning, and it reminded me as you were talking there, how one of the impacts Bernie's made is just kind of giving you someone you could talk with. Yeah. Because as a head coach, you often don't have someone coaching you, or that you can just release whatever you're feeling. So I'm curious just what sort of impact he's made, how he's helped in your development, and yeah, I guess hear more about those conversations.
Well, I'd probably like him to coach me more. I think, the single biggest way, and this sounds like a cop-out, but it's not, it's just modeling, just how he interacts with people and his patience and how he listens, and mm-hmm. and how he invests in the girls and how authentic he is. And so, I think that's a piece, and I think it's just another person that's, that can give me some feedback on, he's not always with us, but especially in those final four runs of like, hey, how does it feel for a player? When I'm talking to a player, how does it, I think I'm saying something, but what does it feel like for them? And maybe he can kind of see that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a little differently than I would.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to have that outside feedback.
Dan, how have you applied, I guess, some of these concepts and your work with Bernie into practice and matches? Like, do your practice plans, have you changed working with him? Can you give us some maybe examples for coaches listening?
Yeah, so that's probably the funnest part is figuring out how to, like, not just to write it on the whiteboard and say, hey, the focus is white belt mentality, like, but actually to like figure out how to put these into a drill. And so we do a lot of drills where we like swag kind of drills where we talk trash to each other on purpose. So we'll do blocking drills where maybe the girl like will block a coach and they'll have to make eye contact and yell sit down or something like that, right? And
That's awesome.
we have a lot of fun with it. It's and we were watching, Bernie brought in, I think it was Roger Federer, and some clips of Roger Federer against Andre Agassi and their interviews after, and both of them kind of had these, really, really good interviews. And Roger Federer's kind of, I guess he said something he probably thinks in his head out loud. It kind of sounded arrogant, but he said something to the effect of, as usual, I played my best in the finals. And so we started doing these block reps. And so after they'd house the ball, they'd yell at the coach as usual. So just finding a way to like make it part of like the fabric of our team, of where that's one example.
Do you start jumping higher, hitting harder, or how do you respond?
Well, I definitely, as a coach.
Yeah, aren't they blocking you said?
Yeah, we give it back to them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good.
but like we want them, we want them a little bit sassy on the court.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
great.
What about in competition? Can you think of any examples of during matches, how you applied some of the concepts?
Well, for sure, like whether it's or like a lot of their resets are individual, but just reminding of learning what they sometimes as they get older will share, the type of words they want me to use with them when they're struggling or stuff that works for them. And or sometimes a timeout might just be like, hey, let's 44 breath, or those are things that pop into my mind.
It's nice to have those go-to tools. Well, let's spend some time just building up Dan's ego here. It's been, I mean, honestly, if you look at the history of Pitt volleyball and then just see this unbelievable trajectory over the last, since Dan took over, it's, clearly what he's done is unbelievable. So Bernie, you've gotten to be firsthand, be around it and see, what are some of the things you think has made him so successful?
Yeah, I had a really long list, and I've had trouble trying to narrow it down to just three things that I wanted to kind of highlight about Fish, because I love being around high performing coaching staffs who are extremely curious in a high performing environment, and Fish has all of that. So the things I think that jump out most, I've had the luxury and the benefit of being around hundreds of coaches working for the Pirates. I mean, we probably have 75 plus coaches in our minor league system. And as the last 10 plus years, watching coaches come in and out, I've been able to see some really, really good coaching. And one of the things, again, to borrow from the Pirates, one of the things that we talk about in our best coaches is this concept of high care, high challenge. And too often you'll see coaches who can do one really good at the expense of the other. They bring a ton of care but they're afraid to challenge. That's probably me when Fish said he probably prefer if I coached him more. I think I have the high care piece, but I don't challenge as directly or as hard as I probably should or could. So we see some coaches who are really good at the high care, but they lack the courage to challenge hard. We see other coaches who are really good at challenge, and they could be just on top of their athletes 24/7, challenging them, pushing them, and yet they may not come across as a high care person, and it may seem more transactional. And I think our best coaches we've seen have this high care, high challenge balance, or we also refer to as high trust, high truth. I build trust with my athletes so I can speak truth. We don't build these strong relationships with a lot of care and trust so that we can be friends with our athletes. We develop these relationships so that we can authentically and honestly challenge them to be better and to grow. So I think Fish does a wonderful job of that. When he's on the court, he's got some of the highest standards, him and his staff and his players, that I've seen in a gym or on a baseball field. The standards are outrageously high, and the players constantly strive to reach them and fall short. And between the players and Fish and his staff, that's not acceptable, and they continue to push, to strive and meet and exceed those standards. And then when you watch them off the court, the high care piece just comes through so authentically. And I think the players recognize it, that he's challenging the performance and then caring for the person. And he does a wonderful job of balancing that piece of challenging the performance in the gym and then caring for the person in the program. I think the second thing then would be, borrowing from, Clint Hurdle and Rod Olson. They had this mantra. Clint Hurdle was the former manager of the Pirates, and one of our advisors was a guy named Rod Olson, who brought us this concept of easy to please, hard to satisfy. And he encouraged a lot of his coaches that he coached, including Clint Hurdle, that he wanted us to be easy to please, hard to satisfy. And I think it really speaks to Fish that, we're pleased with the program's development. We're pleased with our individual player development. We're pleased with the progress we've made, and we're not satisfied. And that comes through, I think, to the players is, that we can be pleased with how we've done so far, and yet we're still not satisfied. There's more to do. So that jumps out at me, I think. And then the last thing, Fish kind of already hit on it. I walked into the gym the one day, and I'm watching this blocking drill go on, and I'm watching the players roof the coaches and just say, as usual. And then I'd watch one of the coaches tool the block off the player, and the coach would go, as usual. And just that sort of that banter back and forth, and that confrontational spirit that comes out in a healthy way was really exciting to see. And, Fish talked about the conversations we've had on the phone, sort of us trying to solve all the world's problems together over an hour conversation. And then walking into the gym and watching Fish put into play. And he calls it drilling the mental game, being able to drill some of the things that we talked about on Zoom a week before. I think he brings the mental game to life and makes it a part of the fabric of his practice. And you don't see a lot of coaches that can do that. They can talk about it in a chalk talk session, but then it gets back to technique and tactics when you're out on the field or out on the court. Fish does a great job of marrying the two. And when I've seen this kind of relationship fail is when a coach says, Bernie, we'd love to have you. We're excited that you're a part of us. Go talk to the players. And the relationship between me and the staff, or me and the head coach, seems kind of just sterile and surface level. And I think it's worked really, really well, and probably works best when, the coaches are curious. I'm curious. We're exploring ideas together. We're brainstorming. We're consoling one another when we're not playing well. And I think Fish does a great job of having that collaborative partnership with me and with his staff as we try to solve all the world's problems together.
Love it.
And Bernie, you mentioned the kind of the swagger as something that stood out. How else would you describe the practice environment at Pitt? And have you seen it change throughout the years, other than maybe fewer injuries than your first day?
I think the big thing that Dan has been pushing for, and that we've seen increasing, is for the players to take ownership in the standards. For a while there early on, they would have high standards. They would pursue high standards as long as the coaches were challenging them. And then if the coaches backed off a little bit, the players might kind of slide back into a level of comfort until the coaches challenge them again. And I think over the years, Fish has really stressed with the leadership of the team that the players need to set the standard and demand the standard. So we started to see that happen. I think, Fish calls it swag, just seeing the swag. That's grown from year to year to year as I've watched. They've found more and more creative and consistent ways to bring sort of the swag attitude and this confrontational spirit. I always talk about confrontational spirit. I think it's a really powerful and positive thing, because sport's all about confronting. And Fish does a great job, and that's built over time, is that confrontational spirit and confrontational banter to kind of get the most out of each other. I guess along that line too, because the gym has such a high compete level, a lot of players that would be playing other places are on the bench, and they don't get playing time at Pitt. And I know that's hard for a lot of those players that are on the sidelines, that don't get to be an everyday contributor. And I think over the years, what I've seen is, their competitive spirit and their confrontational swagger continue to build, and they're able to contribute to those practices in very meaningful ways, even though they're not seeing the court on the weekends as much. And that's something that's continued to grow, as well as how Fish gets them involved and keeps them, the whole thing of, what is it, a rising tide lifts all boats. Like the level in the gym is so high, even with our secondary players, that, I think everybody benefits from it.
And Dan, does that how does that confrontational swagger transfer to the game? Are they staring down and talking trash, or is it just like this? I guess, yeah. What does it look like?
Yeah, sometimes, like, there's times it goes too far, but I think, it's kind of just started, when I switched from coaching men's volleyball, where maybe it's more, it just happens more like naturally with guys, and girls, oftentimes the first thing they want to do is beat themselves up, really focus on what they're doing wrong, and really want feedback on their errors. And so, yeah, like I just kind of had this feeling like, hey, we need to part of our training needs to be training celebrations and training eye contact and training how we're going to talk to each other. And so, I remember I came up with a drill in the early days, called it like celebration lines. And we go, we just do hitting lines, but after every kill, they'd have to do a double fist pump in the air and yell like "vamos," or they would choose like whatever they wanted to do, or maybe they would just go high five a teammate, or they do a fist bump, whatever. We did ridiculous stuff, and I would notice how uncomfortable it was for a lot of the athletes in an empty gym just to do that. And I was thinking to myself, man, you can't even do this in an empty gym. How are you gonna do this in the game when it's needed most? And so, yeah, I think that's something that's I've always felt like, hey, you need to not just train skill, like volleyball skills, but actually, train, your body language as well.
What have you done with what Bernie had brought up? You have these high level players who are probably not satisfied that they're not playing, but it sounds like they're still connected, still working hard. What have you done to keep people who are on the bench engaged and supporting the team?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a great. That's tough for anyone that's good, other than just being honest. And I think trying to be very precise about, I played for John Price at Northridge, and I remember one time he told me I wasn't going to be the starting setter. He was gone with the other guy, and he was very clear about that here's what I needed to do. I need to get better in transition. I needed to better the ball in long rallies. He thought I was better in serve receive, but he gave me something very specific to, like, a path to get back on the court. And so as best as I can, when it's close, I try to be like, hey, here's what's lacking, or here's your path back in. Not just, if it's far away, then I think you need to be kind of brutally honest. If you're like, hey, it's not, but when it's close, those conversations are tough, and it's tougher for them than it is for you. So I don't know that I have anything great, but other than just trying to be very, very clear about what you wanted to work on.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think it can be hard to do. It's sometimes just easier to avoid those direct conversations.
Yeah.
So we wanted to close with maybe some case studies. We came up with some scenarios, and we can make them more specific if you want, but just maybe some things that coaches often see, and would love to hear how you guys both interact with it. From the coach, from the mental skills side. So let's say you had someone who's maybe middle of the year, starting to lack motivation, typically a hard worker. I don't know, maybe it's midterms going on, but they're not fully engaged and not bringing their full effort to practice. For either one of you.
Well, who's going, Bernie?
How about you go first, Fish? I'll jump in after.
Yeah, the first question would obviously be why. Is there an obvious is there like an obvious thing going on in their life that's just pulling their energy somewhere else?
Are you, sorry to cut you, are you able to do that in the moment, or do you get emotionally like fired up and like jump on them right away?
It depends. I think I'm getting better at trying to be really, and the longer you coach someone,
Right.
Like I'm going to go coach a USA team pretty quickly here. And you can't get too fired up in the moment when you don't know an athlete that well. Right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I think, we have them fill out, daily check-ins. And so, ideally, like you've already going into practice, if there's something big going on in their life, maybe you already have a clue about it. But yeah, figuring out why there's been a dip. The other thing I would say is this, is I think ideally my staff and I do a little bit of self-reflection and go, hey, is my practice plan suck? Is this not, did I design something that's not, what is my part in their lack of motivation? I think, nothing demotivates someone with high motivation than being around people that aren't motivated or aren't bringing, so I think there has to be a self-reflection piece. But I guess the final framing I would look at is, are they demotivated because they're getting caught up in being the best, or are they, can we get them back into, focusing on their best? And I would think if they're focused on their best, they would be pretty motivated.
Right.
If I were to add to that piece that Fish said at the end, that's I think a big motivational shift for people who at lower levels, they were always the best. You're the best in the gym, you're the best at the tournament, you're the highest seed at tournaments at the junior level. And then suddenly you show up at an NC2A program and you're no longer the best. In fact, you might just be, among a whole sea of really talented athletes. I think we see that with the Pirates all the time. Players that come from small high schools or colleges, and they've had really a lot of success, and they've always taken pride and found motivation in being the best. They show up to pro ball, and now it's like, wow, I've got 100 guys around me that are just as good, if not better. And suddenly motivation takes a whack, confidence takes a whack, focus becomes distraction because now they're playing the social comparison game, and they get out of sorts because they're comparing to their peers on their left and right rather than focusing on the task at hand. So I think a lot of it is, how can we, as a coaching staff, Fish, his staff, myself, get them focused on being their best? John, you and I have talked about sort of the challenge of playing to win versus playing not to lose, and how players ride that seesaw back and forth. And we've actually talked about a third motivation of playing to PR. How can you focus on sort of self standards and self comparison? Am I better than I was last practice? Am I better than I was last drill? Am I better than I was last week or last month? And that being more of a motivational goal is to continue to elevate yourself from your previous best or your previous standards, and sort of minimize that social comparison based motivation that a lot of people look for early in their careers. Because the better you get, the higher you go, the less that motivation is going to be able to be there for you, because the comparison group gets so much better.
Okay, another scenario for you guys. Maybe Bernie can go first on this one. If a player who's a bit of a perfectionist is trying to make a change and is getting really frustrated and seems stuck.
a video that we show all the time is good. You know, I like perfectionistic athletes. I like athletes who are frustrated. So for me, a lot of it is coming back to the idea of reframing. Like, how can we reframe perfectionism? And I actually had a conversation this weekend with a player who was trying to reduce her perfectionism. And when I asked, I said, how much of this has been helpful for you over the course of your, your 10 years playing the game? And she's like, it's probably very helpful. I mean, I've really had high standards and I've worked hard to reach them all the time. And I often come up short, but I've gotten really, really good because of my perfectionistic views. I said, well, let's not make it the enemy then. Let's recognize that perfectionism is a really important thing with some side effects or with some byproducts. And we need to manage these byproducts. We need to manage these side effects. And that's really kind of what we focused on then is, how can we bring a little bit of self-compassion in to help manage some of the byproducts that come with perfectionism? Because I want high standards. I just don't want that self-condemning and self-defiling internal experience that people have often when they try to pursue really, really hard goals. So it started that reframe along with the frustration piece, to reframe frustration as good. When you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you're going to be frustrated. When you're growing and making mistakes because you're trying hard things, you're going to be frustrated. The fact that you're frustrated is good. There's a book called Mastery by George Leonard. And in that book, he talks about growth requiring what's called spirit of the fool. And I always remember that phrase, that in order to be a really good learner, you need to embrace the spirit of the fool, which means you need to be willing to look foolish by trying really hard things and failing. And I think it was in that book, he talked about Wayne Gretzky would go through this practice of skating to the edge of his abilities at a certain part during each on-ice session. And he'd be losing his blade and sliding into the boards and trying to make extremely hard cuts and turns and falling on his ass. And, you got the rookies that are, working on some stick handling or something, down on the ice, watching Wayne Gretzky falling all over the place. And they're like, this guy's the best ever. He can't even skate. But, Wayne Gretzky's willingness to look foolish and to be frustrated and to push the edge in the envelope, I think is kind of how I would kind of reframe that player who's getting really frustrated because they have really high standards and they're not quite reaching them.
I don't have much to add other than just, the reframe. I love perfectionists. I just want them to channel it to something controllable, like just, hey, be a perfect teammate or have a perfect effort. Just use that energy to something that's, that you can control.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I feel like so often it's a bad thing, and they're probably really hard to change personalities, but the reframe seems more helpful. All right, are you guys okay? We'll edit this part, but do you have enough time to do a couple more? Or do we need to?
I'm good.
You're good.
I'm good too. Sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. Next one. What if you're working with a player who maybe has used a technique or played a certain way that's been successful for them at the juniors level, and now they're at the higher level, but they're reluctant to make a change? How about Dan? You want to start with that one?
Yeah, that's also a hard one because, that's what's got them here. So the work is getting them to see that, it's not necessarily like Bernie says, changing. It's just evolving. It's just growing your skill set. And I think the other thing I would say that I've always, I've always been an emotional coach, but I think I've become even more since I've worked with Bernie is, really attaching emotion when someone, elicits the behavior you want. And we will, I think if we're, say, for example, we're working on middle, trying to develop a better cutback, and she's doing it in isolated reps. She's doing, we've seen her do it, but we get in, practice and it doesn't happen. I think, once you see that first time that she has that great cutback and gets a kill, stopping the drill, blowing the whistle, and just the coaches are jumping around, you're high-fiving her, and you're going, hey, look at your setter, look how happy you made her. And you're trying to really, you know, so it's, you make her feel really good about, you know, doing something in game that she hadn't done before. And I think from my understanding of all the research that Bernie's taught us, that's, you know, when you're, that's what makes things stickier. And so trying to, you know, really attach a lot of emotion to when they finally get it.
And Fish opened up the door with, you know, the value of language. And I think I'll share with you again, I'm coming back to the Pirates quite often during our conversation, but we see this a lot with our ball players that get drafted, you know, and we give a player $3 million and then we tell them, hey, and by the way, you need to change your swing because that swing's not going to work in pro ball. And the player's like, you just gave me $3 million for what I was doing and now you're telling me to change it? It makes no sense. I'm not going to do it. And our coaches had a lot of frustrating times trying to help players make positive changes. And we've even learned through that process that words have tremendous power. And by asking a player to change or to stop doing the wrong technique so they can do the right technique, you get a lot of resistance and discouragement. So just changing our language from, you know, hey, we need you to change your swing to something like, hey, let's make an adjustment. Hey, let's adjust off of this. And not talking about the technique or the skill as, you know, that was wrong, this one's right, or that one's bad, this one's good, but talking about a skill as beneficial and obsolete. You know, that skill, that, you know, the way that you present your platform, you know, that was beneficial when you played at that level against that competition. That might be an obsolete skill now, and here's what's needed. So seeing that, you know, as we grow and evolve, so does our skill needs, and sometimes skills become obsolete that once worked for us. So almost honoring the fact that that worked and was a valuable solution where you were, and now new demands require new solutions. Let's explore some new solutions. I know you talk a lot about problem solving and finding solutions, you know, on the sand, and that's kind of like, I think, how we handle this is, again, it comes back to the reframe piece of how are we reframing it, not as a bad skill, but maybe as one that worked and is now becoming more obsolete as you go up in the ranks.
Love it.
Okay, this one, maybe Bernie first. What do you do with the player who seems super nervous before an event, asking for a friend?
I tell them good and I smile. And I really do, because, you know, if we look at all of the physiological experiences that happen with nervousness and excitement are two sides of the same coin. They are the same exact physiological experience. And we've just been taught to refer to something as nervousness or anxiousness or fear, and some other people might refer to it as excitement. You know, I've got this great picture of these two guys on a roller coaster at the top of the apex, about to go over the cliff, and one has its hands up and a huge smile, and the other guy just has this look of absolute death on his face. And when I ask him, you know, whose heart rate is elevated, and they're like, both of them. You know, well, whose blood pressure is elevated? Both of them. Who's probably has sweaty palms and sweaty pits? And the players say both of them. You know, who's probably got dry mouth because their saliva is all dried up? Probably both of them. But yet one guy's learned to interpret that physiological experience as excitement. The other guy's learned to interpret it in a more negative or threatening way. So first of all, and I guess on top of that, Billy, when you look at the physiological experience of nervousness, everything that our body provides us physiologically is a performance enhancer. You know, we look at why the heartbeat elevates to move more blood, which carries more oxygen and glucose, which gets oxygen and glucose to our eyes. So we're seeing and reacting better to our brain. So we're making better decisions to our muscles so that we're recovering quicker between points. You know, why do we get sweaty? You know, palms and pits, because that's our body's natural air conditioner. So it turns it on half hour before the match, rather than waiting until you're halfway through the first set. And then it says, hey, we need to cool down. Let's start sweating. You know, our body gives it to us before, so we stay at the optimal temperature right from the very first serve. So our body does all this really cool stuff to get us physically ready to compete. And society has taught us to be afraid of it and to try to make it go away. So when you ask, you know, what do you do with a player who's super nervous? I say, good. You know, that's your body's and your nervous system's active warm-up. Just like you go through an active warm-up with your muscles, your nervous system's giving you an active warm-up to get you to top condition. So again, it's the reframe piece. And then I think just normalizing it. You know, I look at Michael Johnson, the sprinter from 1996 who broke world records, and he went on record to say, you know, when I'm nervous, I'm comfortable. I'm in my comfort zone when I'm nervous. And it was Rafael Nadal and Tiger Woods both said, you know, the day I step onto the court, or the day I step onto the tee box at the first tee and I'm not feeling nervousness, that's the day I quit, because I've lost an edge somewhere. It no longer means what it once meant to me. So I think that's kind of what I would do. You know, take a breath, For me, the breath is not to get rid of the nervousness. For me, using the breath and some breath work is to settle into the nervousness, to kind of channel that energy and excitement so we can then use it. But it's not to eradicate the nervousness, because nerves are your friend in this fight.
Dan, anything to add on?
The only thing I would add on to that is just I would try to provide the athlete with some evidence, and just, you know, remind them, hey, like, you've had a great game on days when you felt flat. You've had a great game or a great practice. You know, like when the arena was packed, when it was empty, when you're under stress, when you're too loose, or like just reminding them that, you know, like you've trained in all these environments. And like, yeah, I think that's probably the only other piece I could add on to that.
That's great. So the last one we had, so this is more, I guess, in match, when maybe a player, doesn't seem to be quite themselves, especially from the emotional side, you know, maybe not showing the characteristics, the values that you typically see in them. What would you do on the spot?
Yeah, that's the hardest one. I think that's probably the art piece, and the relationship piece of feeling like the athlete pretty well. Like, hey, can I do something just to piss this player off? Can I use anger in this moment to help, and this will work? Is it better to do absolutely nothing? Is it, what is and so, yeah, I don't have a great answer other than like the better relationship I have with the player, the more I know him, I think, and the longer I've coached him, hopefully that I get better in those moments.
That's helpful. I mean, know your players. Yeah.
And my thought on that one may not be in the moment. I think if a coach is aware of the values of the athletes, you even brought up values, they're not playing in accordance to their values. I think that's where, those in-game adjustments can be made, is between coach player having the conversation. Hey, are you acting out of emotion? Or are you acting out of your values? And let's recalibrate now. The safer player, for instance, is, their values is to be an aggressive, make things happen kind of player who wants the ball and wants the opportunity. Like, that's something that they value competitively. And they're just rolling jump serves in because they're afraid to miss, or they're rolling jump serves in because the score's close in the third set. And they're afraid of making an error and losing a point, possibly losing the set of the match, during a timeout, being able to say, hey, tell me about the serve. Is the serve because of emotion, or is the serve because of, you're living into your values? And hopefully they're going to realize, I'm serving out of emotion here. Fish and I talked a lot about playing emotionally or playing with emotion, and the difference between it. And oftentimes when emotions kick in, players start to play emotionally, and they start to make choices on the court that reflect how they're feeling, not what they value. And I think at times, if you really know your athletes, like Fish said really well, and you know what they value and what their competitive values are that they're carrying onto the court, during that timeout or during that moment in between sets, you could just recalibrate with them and say, hey, you said your values are A, B, and C. How are our choices and behaviors last set lining up with those values? I think too often as human beings, we've fallen into two mistakes when it comes to emotions. The first mistake is, I feel like I need to act how I feel. So if I feel enraged, I need to act enraged. If I feel defeated, I need to act defeated. If I feel discouraged, I need to act discouraged. And I think the other mistake or misunderstanding people have about emotions is they need to act in a way that eradicates the emotion. So if I feel discouraged, I need to find some way to not be discouraged. If I feel defeated, I need to find some way to not be defeated. If I feel enraged, I need to find some way to get rid of the rage. And really what I think, if we've done the work ahead of time, like I talked about in the off season and what Fish talks about, and I think John, you with, some of the competitive pairs or the pairs values that you have, if we've done the work up front, then the goal is to feel the feelings and to honor and accept the fact that I'm going to feel strong emotions, and I can make my next choice based on the values I'm carrying onto the court. And that's the hard part, is, that recalibration when the emotions really flare up, to help them recalibrate back to the values that they want to embody.
Love it.
Thanks, guys. Dan, last question. If you had Bernie as your mental skills coach when you were a player, how many more championships would you have won indoor and on the beach?
Yeah, I don't know how to quantify it, but I would have been better sooner. Put it that way. Took me, I didn't make big jumps. I was slow and steady. And then once I asked John Mayer to play with me on the beach and he turned me down, I think that was when I had to start coaching.
That's when you needed Bernie to deal with the depression. Yeah, cool. Well, this was awesome. This is so fun to get an inside peek at one of the best dynamics, one of the best teams in the country, and appreciate you guys sharing so openly, sharing all that you guys have done together and grown together. Pretty cool that we felt like we played a small part in it. Maybe we were the birth of it, but you guys have obviously done all the work the last 3-4 years, and excited to see what's next and how you guys continue to grow that program. So thank you guys.
Yeah, and congrats to you on a successful college season, and then also to both of you. I mean, what year is this for the podcast?
Losing track.
Yeah,
I mean,
2015 maybe started.
Yeah,
yeah, it's great. You guys
still going. We're still going.
Appreciate all the great content you've shared.
Well, thanks for being a part of it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that was good. Yeah.
It's fun.
Absolutely. Enjoy the conversation.